Hello everyone, this is Tim, and today I'm going to talk to you about Novus. It is an open beta fantasy role-playing game, and this is just basically the cover for the current edition of it. After it's been playtested for a little bit longer, they're going to come up with art and new formatting, links in the PDF, and eventually it's going to be in print. What is Novus? It is a new game by Tim Duggar. He's the author of High Adventure Role-Playing, or HARP, that was put out by Iron Crown Enterprises, or ICE. And I've gotten to know him over the years. We did a lot of posting back and forth about HARP. HARP for me is kind of like the fringe, the edge of my crunch, liking. And most of my house rules were aimed at reducing the rules or making it simpler or making it easier or quicker. So when he started making this game, he asked me to come and pretty much prod it with a stick, comment on anything I didn't like, come up with suggestions for rules that I think would be better for it. And while not all of my suggestions were put into here, a fair amount were. I was kind of surprised. And this is basically the first real playtest I've ever done. Actually in another playtest for another thing, but that happened after this one. So it's kind of been an interesting experience. I've had to print these rules out several times as there's new incarnations and fixes and clarifications and so forth. So my printer isn't liking me right now. But so Novus. I'm just going to kind of flip through it and just talk about some of the points that are in here. It has a kind of traditional fantasy feel to it. I think Tim even said, we're not trying to reinvent the fireball. So you'll have your traditional fantasy races. You have your human, elves, dwarves, halflings, half-elf, and half-orc. And I would expect him to put out new races in new products. And with HARP, they did a lot of small PDFs that had a few things in each one. Maybe a different theme for each PDF. And he's already started to do these with the let's see if I can find it here. I think they're called the Librum. Let me find the link. But basically, just small little PDFs with different content, different rules, just add-ons for your game. And I kind of like that small. They're called the Librum Novus. Man, I can't pronounce stuff today. He already has 2 of those out, even though the game is still in playtest. But I thought those were interesting. So you have your traditional races. You have backgrounds, kind of like how HARP had backgrounds, where depending on where you're from, if you're from a city, a rural area, I can just flip to them, I guess. Let's see here. So, you have your character concept. You choose your race. And the races, maybe we should talk about races first. Humans are pretty much the standard, kind of compare all the other races to. And there's not too many frills with them. But I like that the races are pretty simple. There's not a lot of crunch in each one. Each one has like 2 or 3 special abilities. Like talents. Talents are kind of like feats in D&D. And they're pretty simple and they're pretty concise. And I like that. It lets GMs, if they want to be more flowery and fit them into their fantasy setting of choice, they can add more details to them. So it's not overly complicated. Currently, right now, the stats either have like a +4 or -4. Like there's 8 different stats in the game, and depending on what race you take, they have different bonuses to different races or different stats. So humans, elves, like I said, dwarves, halflings, half-elf, and half-orc. And like I said, I expect more races to come out eventually. But the actual backgrounds that you can pick are barbarian, so like you're basically from the middle of nowhere and you have like a barbarian culture. Hillock, rural, subterranean, sylvan, urban lower class, urban middle class, and urban upper class. And depending on what background you take, we have a new cat in the mix. Meet Willie. He's actually kind of hard to see, but all right. So there's different backgrounds you can take, and when you take a background, they give you basically free ranks in skills, and I believe they add up all to 20 ranks. So basically, those are free. These are the things you learn when you grew up in your homeland, wherever you're from. And the character classes. These are also pretty concise, and for instance, they pretty much take up one page, all the character classes. So when you compare them to, like, say, like D&D, where every character class has like 2 or 3 pages, and there's lots of charts and everything, it's not really the case with Novus. It's pretty concise. They just hit you with the information you need, and then they move on. The classes are Archer, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Mage, Minstrel, Mystic, Rogue, Thief, and Wizard. And like I said, I just did some, well, you're not going to be able to see it, but you can kind of see that that's basically just one page. It just has all the information you need. They basically just go through and they give you how many hit points you gain per level. It's static. You just gain those every time you gain a level. And I believe you add your Constitution bonus to that. It tells you the favored skills you have, and these are kind of like in D&D where you have your class skills and cross-class skills. Here it's called your favored skills and your standard skills. And they have different costs per rank. And in addition to that, the higher the rank is in your skills, they cost more. So it has that, like, the cost goes up as your skill rank goes up. So that's kind of nice. If you don't like that sort of level of complexity, I'm sure you could ignore it, but it's there for a reason. So yeah, hits per level, favored skills. They tell you some favorite stats that are good to, put your higher stats in. And there's 2 different methods of generating stats for the game. One's like rolling dice, and another one is a stat array so far. But like I said, they're pretty concise. Give you a few special abilities, maybe a few talents if that's what the class is good at. And so far, I like the little mix of them. I don't know. We'll see how this works. I'm actually going to be playtesting this with my Monday group pretty soon, and they're making characters this week, and they're going to give me some feedback, and hopefully I'll get some feedback to Tim. The 8 stats that are in the game are Strength, Constitution, Dexterity, and there's actually Speed, and they're kind of breaking apart what we would normally understand as Dexterity for this game. Dexterity is more like dodging and, I don't know, like hand-eye coordination. And Speed is like how fast you are. I guess that kind of makes sense. There's Intelligence, Wisdom, there's Willpower, which is kind of like the control of the mind over the body, that sort of thing, and Charisma. So that's generally more stats than I'm used to in a game, but at the same time, they all kind of do something, and they all affect a certain skill that's listed later in the skill chapter. So it's nice because you can't. It's hard. I think it's going to be hard to min-max when there's more stats and there's more spread of things. So that's interesting in and of itself. There are hit points in the game. You basically start out with 20, and you basically add that to your stat bonus for Constitution, or not, basically to your stat. So if your Constitution is like 18, you would have 38 hit points to start with, and that gives you, you're pretty doughy at a first level character, so you're not going to be, getting wiped out, every every few feet in the dungeon, or wherever you're at. There's a defense rating, and actually I should probably start a little bit over. Sorry if I'm a little scatterbrained here. I have to go to work here pretty soon. But maybe I should go over some basic mechanics and stuff first before I go into defense and how that works. The basic mechanics are 2d10, and it's you need to add any bonuses, and then you need to get above a target number. So 2d10 bonuses, and you need to get over a target number. Some of the interesting things about that, though, is it's not your standard 2d10 method. It's a little bit different, and it's a little quirky, and I'm going to see how it plays out and how it works. I think it'll be pretty good with the fact that fate points can influence things, but I'll get to that eventually. So you roll in 2d10, and you're adding them together. Trick is, if you roll 1, it implodes. So then you roll again with that 1d10, and whatever that number is, that's subtracted from the whole thing. Same thing with if you roll 10, that one explodes, and Sorry, I got cut off again. Okay, so 1 implodes and subtracts from the roll, and a 10 explodes and adds to the roll. And these continue to add or subtract depending on how many times you roll, ones or tens. So, so if you roll 1, let's say roll 2d10. 1's an 8 and 1's a 1. So far your total's 9. You take that 1 and then you re-roll it again. Let's say you get a 5. So you subtract 5 from 9 and you get 4, if my math is correct. And that's probably not going to be over your target number, so you fail. Same thing with exploding dice. Let's say you roll a 10 and like a 4. So your roll is 14. So you take that d10, the one that came up as a 10, and you roll it again. And let's say you get 8. So you have 14 plus 8 is 22. So that's your total. But if you would continue to roll 10s, you could add that to the total again. And same thing with the imploding dice. You're at that 4. Let's see, you rolled a 1 instead. It just keeps getting worse. The only trick is that once you've exploded something, it can't implode. So if you roll a 1 on the next dice, you just add it. Same thing with imploding. If you roll a 10, it doesn't like explode to implode. So it's a little tricky. I've kind of mentioned that maybe the wording needs to be cleared up a little bit in the PDF. But again, that's what the open beta is for, is to basically find all the little quirks and things that could be worded better, or maybe even mechanics that could be worded or changed around to make it better. So with this exploding and imploding thing, there's a mechanic called the snag and boon mechanic. So for every 10 points you're above the target number, you get a boon point. And the player gets to decide how to use these, which is really cool. Let's say you got like 20 over the target number. You've been rolling 10s like a champ, and you got a 20. You'd have 2 boon points to spend on whatever you want. And there's a nice, let's see here, 53. There's a nice little chart that I think would be good to hand out to players that basically gives you lots of options on how to spend these points. For instance, for skill boons, the costs range anywhere from like 1 to 3, and that would be how many you can spend to use them. And you can buy multiple ones if you have them. You have to spend them right then and there on that skill roll or combat roll or spell roll. And there's different boons for each type of thing you're trying to take care of. But for instance, so if you have let's say you roll like 10 over the target number, you can spend this one. Saves against the skill just used have the target number increased by 2. So you make it harder for the person you're trying to get over on to, make things happen. But they're kind of interesting because you can affect things, and it puts a little bit more control in the player's arena, which some games have done a lot more of. So like I said, this isn't really like a story gaming kind of thing where like all the players have just as much control as the GM. The GM is still in control for the most part, but this is just like one of those, the small advance of player ability, player control over things. So that's that. And there's another thing. It's called the Nova roll. Let's say you roll a 10 on one of your d10s, and you roll a 1 on the other d10. They cancel each other out, and you get a fate point. You can only have up to 5 fate points in the game, but if you're the kind of GM that likes fate points, you can just ignore that rule and just have more fate points. So that was kind of cool. All right, so that's the basic mechanic. So like I said, 2d10, you add them together, add any bonuses from stats or skills, and try to get over your target number. And sometimes they blow up, sometimes they implode, and sometimes they cancel each other out, and you get a fate point. All right, so like I said, there's hit points, there's defense, and defense is basically what someone with a combat skill would have to get or exceed to hit you. And to use those boon point things again, they would have to get 10 points above your defense to get a boon point. And the combat ones can get kind of nasty, where they do extra damage, or there's a whole range of things. And I would expect that the options are going to increase as the beta goes on, as people have suggestions, what cool things they can do in combat. You have spell points, and the system pretty much goes through, and you have certain spell points you need to do, and there's a spell roll to make sure that your spell actually goes off. As far as fate points go, I was talking about those. character starts out with 3 of them, and he basically gets additional 1 every level, and anytime he rolls a Nova roll, the 10 and 1 on 2d10. Okay, so with fate points, you basically spend 1 and you get an additional d10 to add to whatever roll you're doing. You can use them to get boon points. You can use them to cancel out someone else's boon points that are targeted against you. You can spend more than 1 fate point per action as long as you have them. Let's see here. And you can only have 1 source of fate points affecting a roll, so you can't have everybody at the table throwing fate points at you to help you out. It's interesting in this game that for languages, they use talents instead of like skills. So if you want to learn a language, you basically just have to buy a talent, which again is like a D&D feat. I thought that was an interesting way of doing that. Everybody has 30 character points at the start of the game to develop your character, and you get 15 additional after that, plus half of your level. I think you round up for that. So you can buy skills with this, you can buy talents, and I like it because at character creation, that's where you're going to buy most of your talents. Because, it wouldn't really make sense if you're like 3rd level and, ho, I know dark vision now. I have dark vision. And so you'd have some sort of character background, just, reason why you're having dark vision. Maybe your great-great-grandfather was a dwarf or something. But you have to balance, do you want a lot of talents or do you want a lot of skills? Because the points for both of those things are all your character points. So if you buy a lot of talents, you have less to put in skills. If you buy a lot of skills, you have less to put in talents. So it's a little bit of a balance game as you're making your character, but it's nice because it's very flexible. If you want a lot of cool abilities, but you don't really want to know how to do a lot of things, you can do that. And I really like that aspect of Harp, and I'm glad that it made it to this game. The skill costs change as the skill rank goes higher and higher, so you have to put more and more character points to raise your skills, which, is kind of like the learning curve of life, and that makes sense. Basically, every 5 ranks, it gets a little bit more expensive. And like I said, favored skills start out at like 1 character point, and standard skills start at like 3 character points per rank, and then those, like I said, go up. It's interesting. I saw this the other day, and it didn't really click for me until I actually read it again. The maximum skill ranks depends on the stat that is associated with the skill. So basically, if your stat value is like a 12, the highest rank you can have in a skill that is associated with that stat is also 12. And that's if the stat that's if the skill is favored. If that's what your class gives you. If it's not favored, it's half of that, so 6. So it's based on stat, and it's not based on level. So if you have a really high stat, you can really kind of sink some skill ranks into those skills and be pretty good at them fairly early on. Let's see what else we got here. The skills themselves. There's a fairly short list of skills, but if you look inside of them, some of them blow up into more skills. So when you're making your character, make sure you check that out. A lot of them are, especially like, let's see here. I took a few notes here. Like the main skills are acrobatics, athletics, combat, which breaks down into smaller skills, crafting. There's lots of craft skills. First aid, gimmickry. That's kind of like messing with locks and traps. Influence, lore. There's lots of lore skills under that. Magecraft, which is kind of like your magical skills, and it also kind of affects what school of magic you can. I think it's actually spellcraft. There's navigation, perception, performing arts like music and art and so forth. Riding, spellcraft that breaks down into smaller skills. Stealth, streetwise, survival, tracking, and trickery. So just looking at the skills right off the bat, you'd think, okay, it doesn't have a lot of skills, but there's actually a lot of, underneath skills, I guess you would call them. But that's the skills. What else we got here? Like I said, there's the talents that are like feats in D&D, and some of them are not trainable, which means you cannot learn them at higher levels. So when you're making your character, it's good to see which talents you can get later on and which ones you need to take at character creation. Of course, if a GM wanted to let you acquire these at a later time, they could. Some of them just wouldn't make sense. So that's something that's different. Talents. There's money and equipment, just like any other RPG. Something that's interesting about the defense rating, you know, it would kind of be like armor class in D&D, is that shields add to defense, but armor doesn't. So armor is really just like it's called an armor rating, or like damage reduction, and depending on what area of your body gets hit, you know, you want to try to use that armor that's on there. It really doesn't have hit points per area like some of the other RPGs do, but I think for some special critical results or something, like you have a helm, and if something hits you in the head, then you know, that's what's going to really protect you. So I thought that was interesting with the shield adding to defense but not armor, because I've kind of done that as house rules in a few RPGs and kind of tweaked with that, so that was interesting. There's a fairly good selection of weapon skills, and each category of weapon is its own skill. So depending on what you pick, you would have to take a skill that would kind of make sense for that, you know, that weapon. There's an encumbrance system. Combat. Everybody has 5 action points per round to do things, and actions have different costs for armor, for action points for that round. So if you want, you know, movement actually has costs. Yeah, basically you move your base movement, and you can do that up to 5 times per round because it only costs 1. So whatever your base movement is, if you spend 5 action points, that's all you do that round. Or you could spend like 2 action points moving, and then maybe, you know, 3 points on different things. So you can mix and match what you want to do. And I've never played in a system that had action points like that. And I'm not talking like the action points like Tetsubu talked about, which are like fate points. These are just like dividing the combat round into 5 little segments, and different actions cost a number of segments, of, you know, a number of action points. So for instance, like casting a spell costs 4. Let's see here, concentration with like 3. Melee attack costs 4. So you can move up, you know, your base movement and attack, because that equals 5. So I'm going to have an interesting time play testing out the combat rules and the action points and see how that works out, because I've always been intrigued by them, but I really haven't had actual experience with playing a game with that. There's different combat moves that some of them are everybody can do them, and there's some advanced ones that you'd have to do to, you have to basically buy them to be able to do that, and certain talents let you buy certain things. But they give you bonuses to defense or bonuses to attack or special rules. You basically just have to read through each one. There's combat styles. Magic, there are different schools of magic. There's black magic, divine magic, high magic, mysticism, natural magic, and wizardry. And you have to have a spellcraft skill to be able to use each of those schools of magic. So you'd have to have a black magic spellcraft skill to be able to cast those spells. And the skill rank in that, like the black magic skill, would be what you roll to cast that spell. So if you want to focus all on one school of magic, you can do that fairly easily. Excuse me. Spells are pretty standard. There's some interesting ones in there. There are saving throws in the game that are based off of the 8 stats. So you actually just have a save that is associated with each of your stats. So there isn't like a separate area for saves. It's literally just right where your stats are, which I thought that was interesting. Because you can have a save versus intelligence, a save versus constitution, save versus speed. Really just whatever makes sense for the situation, that's the save that you would make. But there's a big chunk of details on the spells. The spells aren't very long. Like I said, they're pretty concise. The whole PDF so far is actually pretty small. There's summoning and rituals, and then there's a section on, you know, how to come up with difficulty ratings and how to spend your snag and boon points, occupational hazards, you know, pretty much your standard RPG things that happen, like pit traps and light fires and that sort of stuff. All right, I forgot to put in here about some basically just things about combat, so I'm just going to quickly do that. Every weapon does base damage, so it's not variable dice damage like most RPGs. So basically, each weapon has a specific amount of damage that it deals when an attack is made. For example, mace does 5 hits of damage, while a club does 4 hits. So it's just straight base damage depending on what weapon you choose. And then there's scaled damage. For every point above the target's defense that the attack roll is, the attacker gets to add 1 additional point of damage to the total number dealt. So let's say you did 5 points with that mace, and you were like 5 points over the defense. So far, you have 10 points of damage that you've done. So you don't need a lot of different funky dice to play the game. Pro or con, we wanted to do something a little bit different than your standard variable dice damage, so that's what we went with. And additional to that is you have those boon points. So remember, every 10 points over the target number, or the defense in combat's case, you get a boon point, and you can use those to get additional damage. And also you can use fate points to get additional. That's right. For fate points, you can't get additional damage, but you can just add to the number of the attack. You get that extra dice to add to it. And if you get more, you can actually get more boon points that way, which could in turn be turned into damage. So that's just something to keep in mind. That's basically it. Like I said, there's different combat moves that you can pick up for character points and buy them, and talents for different damage. Okay, I just forgot that brief little thing there, and we'll get back to the rest of the video. Okay, and then there's a GM section in the back of the book that talks about giving out XP for session, for successful goals met, those sorts of things. There's a nice, pretty much like a creature catalog at the back. Each page has, I don't know, like from 4 to 5 monsters on each one. That would probably change whenever the artwork comes around. But again, pretty concise, pretty small. So it's not taking up a whole page. It's not like the monstrous giant, like the giant like stat blocks. I guess maybe if they had a lot of skills, it would be more. But for the most part, I don't know. They're pretty concise. The nice thing is if you read through the monsters, something in the back of your head will start to get tickled. It's like, these sound awfully like I don't know, a certain first edition of a certain RPG, and especially the demons and the devil section. Just kind of shouted that, and I thought that was kind of interesting, kind of a neat like homage to that sort of style. So there's a little bit of old school flavor in the monster descriptions, and I greatly appreciated that. I think that was pretty sweet. But there's a fair amount of monsters to throw at your players, and again, I'm sure there will probably be an expansion or whatever that has more monsters. It's mainly the big chunk of the back is the monsters, and then it goes through and there's some treasures and just some sample things, magical weapons, armor, so forth. Pretty much what you would expect. Like I said, it's the PDF, like the last page here, is page 81. That's where the stuff is, and then there's like the character sheet. It's not very large. It's an entire role-playing system in roughly like 80 plus pages. And I'm sure that'll change with art and so forth. The download I put in the link, like I said, there's a free version that's just like the no frills PDF, and then there's the deluxe version, which will be upgraded with art. They'll be hyperlinked and bookmarks and all that good stuff, and eventually it's going to be in print. But I'm playtesting it. I put a link down for Firehawk Games. That's the company that's putting it out. You can download the free one if you want to spend. I think it's like $5. The price will slowly go up as the open beta continues. But basically, whenever the final product comes out, you'll be able to, get the latest download, or eventually you'll be able to get, in-print version. But I've been playtesting it. It's been enjoyable to have sort of my input on something, and whenever one of my suggestions got put into the game, I kind of felt good about it. It's cool that my name's in the front cover. As one of the playtesters and proofreaders. But I don't know. It is what it is. If you like it, check it out. Maybe give it a spin, see what you think. I don't know. I'll talk to you guys later.